Where do you live, Tom?
I am in Los Angeles, and it is absolutely crazy town over here as well.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah. This is like the outside of New York, and I guess you guys are talking about the southern states. This is where the rest of the crazy goes.
Yeah.
If it doesn't make it all the way to Florida, or if it doesn't stop off in Arizona, it just goes straight to Los Angeles.
You guys have 3 more months of lockdown, right?
At least.
Yeah.
At least. That's what it's looking like.
Yeah. I have a good friend who lives out in LA. He owns a pair of 7-Elevens, one downtown and one I don't know where, but life's been crazy for him.
Yeah. It's been that for everything else. I mean, it's one thing when you can when you're having a conversation with a kid, and the kid just thinks that because you're somebody that's older than them, that you've seen it all. So I was talking to my niece, for example, and she was like, so, what did you guys do the last time something like this happened? And I'm sitting there like, I wish I could help you.
That was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
My concern with this is that they had a gigantic second wave for 1918, and I'm concerned with all of these states opening up.
My wife.
That's the scary thing.
Yeah. My wife has to go back to work. And they're an international company, but we'll see. And they were pretty good ahead of time, but in late June they're going back to work. But she's masking up, so
good.
As long as she's no dummy about that. So,
good.
But I ain't going no place. In the grocery store,
right?
That's basically all I ever go anyway. So,
right now it's work and home and sometimes grocery store, and then I'm like, don't touch me, don't talk to me, I don't care. All right, buddy, you are good to go whenever.
All right, Matt, do you have the show sheet? Did Stompy?
No, I haven't. I didn't send it to him. Here, I'll send it to you right now. If
all impromptu, it's okay with me. Surprise me.
All right, man.
All right, good. I love it. I like it. All right, let's get right into it. Sam, you said we're good to go?
Yep.
All right. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the shop. Welcome to the
He did it again. Hey, Todd.
No idea.
Hey. Hey, Todd.
When he hits the mic, it does
don't touch the mic. Plug in the mic. Well, this could be fun.
That's right. That's all right. That's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, sorry about
the
that.
magic. Oh, this stuff happens all the time, man. It's part of the deal.
Is it plugged in correctly? Like not loose?
Everything's fine. It's not loose. Just I don't know. All of a sudden, it's got finicky. So
don't touch it.
I'm not.
You gotta mute on the screen if you're gonna mute.
Yeah, no, it's not. I'm not muting it on purpose. I'm not touching it to mute it. It cuts out every now and then. I'm not sure why. Anyway, did you actually say what's going on after I introduced you?
Nope.
Did you even hear that part?
Nope,
No?
it cut out in the middle of your intro there.
Perfect. Okay, one more time. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the shop. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Dynasty Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Eitan Mozia. I am here, as always, with Sam Stompy Lane, and we are beside ourselves. We are so excited to have the master of the RSP, the college football savant, coming to sit down with us at Studio or In Shop today. With us, Mr. Matt Waldman. What's going on?
Hey, man, it's nice to be here. Get a chance to chop it up with you guys once again, and should be a good time.
Is it weird that I get starstruck even though we've talked before?
Maybe, but it's only weird. It's only weird if you make it weird.
Okay,
that's what my buddy Gene says.
I'll start making it weird. No, but honestly, still, and I think I did this last time. Still, my favorite fantasy resource, RSP. I don't think there's anything out there better or more detailed than the RSP, especially getting you prepared for your rookie drafts and just looking at the NFL rookies in general. I know I take it as kind of my quote unquote Bible or gospel for fantasy football. So, I mean, all the respect in the world, because I know you put tons of time and effort into that. And it's one of the most outstanding and astounding not articles, but pieces of work in fantasy football.
Well, I really appreciate that. This is year number 16, and so, or year 15 actually. Year 16 will be 2021, so it's almost old enough to drive. Maybe here in Georgia, where you don't have to, you can get your parents' permission apparently without the driver's test. Lord knows what's going to happen around here. But anyway,
what? So they're the ones that are opening up the beaches and then allowing.
Yeah, that's the least of your worries. Yeah. That is the least of the worries.
I've driven in LA. Let me tell you, driving in Atlanta is worse. So. Ooh. Yeah, I can tell you that for sure. Growing up here and have been driving in LA. The only place worse than driving in Atlanta and LA might be Miami, because there's about 10 different cultures all driving around at once. And none of them care about the other's rules because they all learn somewhere else, But but yeah, the RSP's been around for 15 years, and I keep trying to make it a better product each year. And I've actually just was telling you guys before we got on the show that next year I've kind of change some processes around and kind of doing some things that will be even more in depth in many ways, in terms of the type of things that I look for each of the 4 positions that I study.
Yeah, just to continue the Fawn Fest over here. I mean, it's not just the detail and it's not just the work that's put into it. It's the level of transparency that you provide with your process behind why it is that you make the assertions that you do make in that RSP that I think makes it so valuable. Even if people, for some reason, just decided to take nothing away other than how to scout players the way Matt Waldman scouts players, that would be beyond valuable. So I really do appreciate that you make that as accessible as you do.
I appreciate that, and it's, that's part of the work, is that you want to be able to understand, when you're doing any type of analysis, there's a craft to it. Even if there's some science, it's part science, there's a little bit of art to it. And part of it too is kind of you're projecting performance. So part of that is that you want to be able to have a process for how you go about doing things, because you're going to make mistakes. And in order to keep track of your mistakes, you have to keep track of everything that you do in a way so that you have a definable compass. That way, when things don't go well or go the way that you expected, you can kind of have a way to help you, learn from that and then do something different moving forward. But you're doing it in a way that's a little bit more scientific, a little bit more structured, so that you're not lost, because a lot of times what happens when we evaluate is that there's so many things that we look for. There's dozens and dozens of things that you're looking for with a player, that if you think, oh, I can just do this off the top of my head and keep track, well, you may be applying a different standard to a different player at the same position, and doing it in a way where you're subconsciously giving different weights when you should be giving the same weights to things, or that you forget a detail. So it just helps people understand that there's a lot that goes into this, and that that I'm keeping track of what it is that I do and go through that process with a fair amount of rigor, so that when I am learning something, that I can apply it moving forward. And I'm not just going, well, I respect Lance Zierlein and I like Lance, but because Lance said something, well, then maybe I should look at that. No, that's not how it should go. Lance may be coming from a completely different viewpoint of something that I may not yet know about, or he may be coming from a viewpoint that I've already been there 5 years ago. And And he's just getting there. And I have no idea, because other than us going, hey, how you doing in the Senior Bowl? And what do you think of this player? And we talk about him for 5 minutes, and then he's got to go or I got to go. We don't have in-depth conversations about how we arrived at something. So when you're evaluating, it is something where you're getting inside someone's brain and having the opportunity to like make it as detailed as possible helps people understand, you know, if they have a question about something, they can go into it into that level of detail and pull it out.
If I took all the nouns out and didn't know we were talking about football, I could have sworn you were talking about scientific method and how to keep a lab book. That's exactly what you're doing. You're writing down all your observations. You're taking the numbers into account. You're doing analysis on that. And then you're drawing a conclusion from that data. So I think that colleges should offer fantasy football sciences for people like us. That's probably not going to happen. People, that'll turn into what is this, like one of those BAs in dancing? I don't understand. I'll be like, hey, listen here.
There were Harry Potter literature classes not that long ago at some of the top colleges in the United States, so I would not put it past anybody.
I think Sigmund Bloom would love that.
There we go.
Is he a Potterhead?
I think he'd love teaching a class.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
He'd
be one of those like liberal professor types with his long hair and the glasses,
hanging out in the bars. All of that. Yeah.
If he wears socks with his Birkenstocks, then he's full on professor.
Oh, he'd be there. Trust me, he'd be there.
Hey, we us three, we have some work to do for 2021 to make that a reality and to make sure that we get Sigmund Bloom in the classroom teaching the next college class, if we ever get one. But yeah, I mean, just kind of going on into it. So you mentioned that you've been doing this for 16 years. I'm sure you've got a lot of questions on how you got into it and all the rest of it. I don't want to bore you with that. So let's not talk about that. Let's talk about throughout the 16-year process of actually doing it. What are the major evolutions that you've kind of gone through in that time? Because you just talked about, you know, you and Lance Zierlein, for example, maybe not necessarily being in the same place. Maybe you guys looked at maybe the same things years apart, and you or he's learned from it in some type of way. So kind of go through what you've been able to do and figuring out what you first sought out to accomplish and how you've changed it iteration by iteration to get it closer and closer to what you put out today.
Well, I think probably the first 5 to 7 years was about learning as much about the game as possible through studying these players in terms of how they fit into the game. So I spent increasingly during those first 5 to 7 years, I found myself writing more and more and more about what I saw with every play. And so at first you look at the first 2 to 3 years and it was kind of more like, all right, he's got good speed. He does this well. He in something more in summary type of form. And then from the years like 3 to 7, it became increasingly like when I'm tracking everything, it's like, all right, there's 3 safeties playing high before the snap. One of them moves down to the hash about 10 yards off here, and like literally noting what every player little adjustment was, what everything that the players were doing. And I'm writing hundreds of pages pretty much it seems like for all the players that I studied, because I was basically playing a game of I Spy observation, basically for everything that I was looking at to see what was relevant and what was not. So I learned a lot more about coverages. It forced me to learn a lot more about coverages and alignments and, different types of plays and how these players were impacted with that, and then into technique. And at a certain point, probably from years about 12 to 15 or 12 to 16 around now, has been more about, okay, I've learned a good amount about these types of things and I've learned about a lot of details, but now it's kind of about the very thing that got me interested in these players and made me kind of jazzed about them in the first place, which is who intuitively understands how to make their best plays. How do they process information well in a way that can't always be taught? What can and can't be taught? What can and can't be improved? What are things on the field that are more meaningful than, for instance, understanding, what type of play it is and what type of coverage that they're facing. For instance, with quarterbacks, it's something because, Mark Schofield and I work together on my site, and we do a podcast, and Mark's a former quarterback. And it's so funny because he said, I'm coming around a little bit to you and you're coming around to me a little bit. He said, I come around to you because you've been always more about like, you don't care whether it's a Yankee concept or a dagger concept, or whether they're facing cover 4 or they're it's a cover 2 high man or whatever situation. And you're not all about, trying to break down what all those different theoretical schematic concepts are. Your part is does he spot the open situation and does he hit the open man? And it's like, there's theory. You've got to, knowing those different concepts is helpful, but it's like the most important thing is, can he read the leverage of the defender? And when he reads it, does he hit his mark on time? It's just like if you're acting or playing music, if you're acting, your lines, it's one thing to memorize all your lines. It's another to be able to judge the person's reaction that you're having an interaction with, and know when to be able to hit your line to make it sound natural, or when to adjust to a situation, because what the person gives you, you have to kind of give back. And as a football player, sometimes you have to take what you've learned, in the classroom and practiced on the field, and combine it with things that weren't practiced, but you've done in other avenues, and combine them together to create something that's going to be productive. It's not like Patrick Mahomes is certain throws that he makes, he practices over and over again. There are certain things that he does because he has a good feel for being able to put 2 and 2 together and realize that he has to make that kind of adjustment, and it happens in a split second. And that's the difference between, say, someone like, Mahomes and Alex Smith. Alex Smith could teach a class. He could be, he'd be like the math teacher who would basically tell you how the formula worked, but he may not have the poetry in his game to actually like see a situation, and he'll hesitate just the last moment because he wants to see absolute confirmation. He's like the economist who basically like he wants to wait for everything to have happened before he declares that we had a recession. Whereas like Mahomes is kind of more the business owner who's like, I don't need to wait 6 months after the recession's already over to say there was a recession. I actually need to act while the recession's getting started to actually keep my business afloat. And that's kind of the practical, the thing is that Alex Smith would make a great coach maybe in that way because of theoretical, but Mahomes is kind of more of a practical person. So it's like oftentimes teams look at players like that, and when they scout for all the intellectual, all the bullet points of things that are just like tangibles. But you have to be able to find a way to define the intangible in a way that you can spot it and see it. So I find myself more and more, working towards that end while maintaining the, here are the things that are important. But it's like, for me, those are some of the big things. Some of the other things are just about how my scoring's evolved, and how I've defined things. I find that even though I'm always trying to look for those simple things that really make a difference, it often drives having more and more detail to what it is that I'm looking for, so that I can find, because when you're looking at players who are good, they do things that are kind of between the lines. There's that invisible thread that connects everything together. But in order to find the invisible thread, you kind of have to magnify everything even more. So you have to have more details in order for you to spot it. So I have to get better at, listing all the different types of routes and coverage, different types of routes players run and the techniques that go into those routes, or the different types of footwork styles that a runner uses, and all of that kind of stuff, and put it in there. And also just grading systems, talking about how I grade players where, with wide receivers, there's 3 different type of wide receiver positions. So going, okay, he's a good wide receiver, to, all right, now I have to start thinking about, should I be grading flankers differently from split ends? Should I be grading slots differently? Should I be grading different types of slot players differently, like the speedy short guys versus the the taller, slower guys, the Marcus Colstons of the world, or the Michael Thomases versus the Wes Welkers of the world, So there's those types of differences. Or with running back, should I start grading scat backs versus, 3 down backs? And those are things that that continue to evolve. So it just gets, you get deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole as you do this stuff, but you still want to be able to create information that people can use it, and it's not just becomes a theoretical tome.
It comes off as that it makes you a better football fan. Is that the case? Because now you're watching everything on the field. You're watching what the defense is playing, where the linebackers are in terms of depth, what is going on in terms of communication on the line and stuff like that.
I think in theory, it makes you a better football fan in the sense that if you can have the perspective to say, if I'm sitting on the rare occasion and I'm hanging out and watching football with my friends and I'm not studying the game, that I can sit back and go, I really don't know what I'm watching, just like anybody else. Everyone else pretends that they know they're watching, like they're out there and we're all sitting there having beers and we're eating and we're watching the game. Like everyone has an opinion and we're all talking, and it's like, you're going to hear lots of people say this should have happened or this should have happened. And sometimes they're right, for sure, but the more I do this, when that happens, the more I realize it's like, I'm going to have to watch this game again to really know what happened here. So it's like, I'm just going to have a good time and hang out with my friends and enjoy what I did see. But I realize now that football for me is like, from that level, it really is about, a lot of things bear closer examination. But what is funny is the longer I do it, because you get into that detail, there are moments where certain things that people who are like media or folks like us will see, like when you hear Dave Wanstead say that when he was at the University of Pittsburgh, that he watched 2 plays of Dion Lewis and immediately knew he needed to offer him a scholarship and turned off the film and did that. I remember the first time I heard that and I thought, that's ridiculous. And now I like after you watch the game, if you see a certain number of plays, and I'll use this and credit Mark Schofield again. He calls them put the pen down moments, where like you just see certain things. And we watched like Trevor Lawrence together, and there were certain plays where you see enough stuff. You can watch a limited number of plays and see enough of the criteria of what that guy shows that you're like, yeah, he's good enough. I know that this, now where I may not know whether I'm going to slot him overall number 1 versus number 5 on my list in terms of quarterbacks, but I know this guy's going to be a good pro prospect. Dion Lewis, I've seen enough running backs now that I can look at a couple guys and go, yeah, that guy's going to be good. Now, I'm not going to put the pen down or my keyboard down and say, I'm not filling out a report and I'm not going to watch any more games, because the thing is just like all of us, we all have things we're intuitive at. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of the things that I've come up with that were like maybe takes on players that other people would go, that turned out to be a good call and it went against the grain, because my intuition was like, I saw 2 plays of Patrick Mahomes against LSU when he was a rising sophomore, and I was like, that guy's going to be great. I remember
right.
I wasn't even like studying him. I was like at a gym or something. I don't remember where I was, but I saw on the TV and I watched those 2 plays. I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to watch this guy. He is going to be unbelievable. And then I try and forget all that and say, here's my big process with all this stuff I got to do. And let's see just how much my intuition actually makes any sense, because I need to make sure that what I'm doing, either it supports it or counters it, because I'm not going to lean on it. But I find more and more often that because the intuition tends to be sometimes for people, it's really a confluence. It's your ability to process things ultra fast on things that you've learned to know, that spending 15 years studying it so incrementally, now there's things I watch and I go, I bet that's going to be special. And then you watch it and you're like, okay, I must have seen something must have caught my eye about that, and it can be wrong, but I find more often now that when I see someone say Dave Wanstead offered Dion Lewis a scholarship after 2 plays, that's just crazy. I'm like, no, Maybe it isn't.
Okay. Fair enough.
No, that's fair. I watched the same 2 plays. Yeah, honestly, it's kind of got to be. It's got to be just an absolute trip to be able to parse through all the information that you do go through and figure out what is the most important or what should be ranked first when it comes to kind of looking how you evaluate the whole prospect. There's so many things that you're trying to look at in a football game that, like you said, you may not even necessarily know you're looking at. There's coaching influence. There's the influence of what the other team is doing on defense, who the other team is trying to key in on, and maybe that's a reason this other guy is uncovered on this play. There's so much context in football that often goes kind of left by the wayside because we don't necessarily have all the scientific information out there to explain it. So what do you do, or what do you think that over the last 16 years of doing this has allowed you to kind of, what kind of place have you gotten to that you are able to, at least in some circumstances, kind of split the wheat from the chaff and figure out, okay, well, this is something player specific versus, okay, well, this can be explained by a number of other factors.
Yeah, and I think that what's done that is really, it just comes back to that process of defining as much as possible what a player can control. Like, what is it, look at all the things that a player is asked to do and define it in a way where you're defining success or failure for that process or that trait or ability. You're defining it based on whether they put themselves in a position to make a positive play or put someone else in a position to make a positive play. And I learned that very early on. It's just a matter of, again, continuing to develop and understand all the techniques and different theories of like concepts that maybe quarterbacks or wide receivers have to look at or running backs have to look at in terms of, defenses or run blocking schemes or coverages or route types. The more you know about that stuff, the more then you can start to separate out what did the player do that could put himself in a position to make a positive play. Because what ends up happening there is that you can look at a moment like, say, you can look at a game like, say, Joseph Adai way back in the day, before I really started parsing out the difference between gap and zone plays and different types of footwork that work with those different types of plays. I still was doing well enough at that point with running backs, at least, that I was able to look at it and go, Joseph Adai averaged 1.8 yards per carry against an unbelievable Auburn defense and didn't really have a good statistical day. And people are going to bang on him and say he's not a very good pro prospect. But because of what I'm defining as what's successful or what's not, he ended up with a very high grade because it was like he did all the things that was asked of him to do. He just didn't have any help. And then I found that over and over again with Matt Forte, with Ahmad Bradshaw, with a number of different backs where they had like moments where they averaged less than like 2-3 yards per carry, or they were on a team where like Matt Forte and Tulane had one guy who actually could outlift only one player on the LSU team. Like the rest of the LSU team could outlift every player that Matt Forte had as a teammate, on Tulane. They were all that much stronger. And he's getting met in the backfield over and over again, and he's still, minimizing losses or making gains in the way that he was doing it was like impressive. The types of cuts he made, what he saw, how he was able to avoid and create and get downhill efficiently, what he was accounting for, all his ball security, his pad level, the way he moved, all those things that you say, if he had blocks, he'd be successful because he did all the right things. So that's really the differentiating factor, is if you can keep the perspective of, is the player doing the things he needs to put himself or his teammates in a position to make plays. It doesn't matter whether the play is successful or the play is not. And that often separates the guys that people say, oh, he's unbelievable, he's great, because look at his accuracy rating and look at how many wins he's had and look at how many bowl games he's gotten this team to and all of that, versus the guy that's like, yeah, his box scores aren't all that great, and he's never really won anything, and he gets stopped by good teams. When he faces good teams, he doesn't play well. And then you're able to kind of differentiate all those kind of narratives that people generate that they think are important when they're really not.
I love it. All right, so we are going to shift now into our 5-point inspection. We're just going to go through a few questions here that kind of just are on the back of my mind, on the back of, I'm sure, some of the listeners' minds about what might happen this coming Dynasty season. So there were a bunch of highly rated prospects last year that kind of failed to launch at the wide receiver position. There were a lot that obviously made it very, very unforgettable, made 2019 very, very unforgettable in A.J. Brown and Terry McLaurin. But we also have the other side of the coin. But we see progression. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't really take into account when they're looking at these players. They assume that the finished article is kind of coming into the league already and there's nothing from there. And that couldn't be farther from the case. Year two is often where you see the most progression at the wide receiver position. Which one of these seemingly kind of dead to me now wide receivers do you think has maybe a better shot of having some significant fantasy relevance this season? Is it N'Keal Harry without Tom Brady? Is it J.J. Arcega-Whiteside now that he has some other guys around him to maybe take off some of the pressure? Or is it Andy Isabella, even though now he has to deal with DeAndre Hopkins? Is there one of these year two guys that you think maybe could explain why their first year didn't go as planned and really you're still excited about going into year two?
Sure. We can think of a couple of guys here. I'll add a third to the mix, but I'll give you two. N'Keal Harry is certainly one of those guys where you look at a situation, he's going to be put on the spot. He's going to be forced to either be good or they're going to be getting rid of him fairly soon. So while there's certain things about his game that I'm not extremely excited about in terms of his lack of burst, his lack of ability to really separate early, the point of the matter is that these guys can improve. They can get quicker when they enter the league with a little bit more of a training program. They can also develop their press release skills a little bit more, develop those techniques. So we'll see if the work he was doing was smart. If these guys work hard in the offseason, but is he doing smart work and applying himself in the right direction so that he can be able to overcome some of the flaws that he had? So he's going to be an interesting one to watch, and I wouldn't necessarily write him off right away because of the fact that he's going to get opportunity. He's being counted on, and the rest of these guys in the New England Patriots organization, including him in many respects, are all slot receivers, or when you name them, they're like, well, they'd be better off in the slot, and I've kind of joked about that on other podcasts. It's like, name a New England Patriot wide receiver who you wouldn't say would be best in the slot. And the answer is none of them. You can't name one that would be like, oh, he'd be better as a flanker. He'd be better as a split end, so I don't know what's going on with that. The Andy Isabella is going to be fun because while I was not a big fan of him coming out because I thought he was kind of a Braxton Miller type of receiver, which is the type of guy that everyone gets excited about when you see him in all-star games because he makes all these playground shake and bake type of moves. I joked around and kind of called him Dance Fever because he was one of those guys that he would make slick moves at the line of scrimmage, but he took so much time to do that in a real game, you're not going to get that opportunity. You're basically late coming out of your break, making those types of moves. And everyone went gaga over Braxton Miller that way. And the basic issue is he couldn't separate because he leaned too much on moves that weren't efficient. And Andy Isabella had a similar problem. But here's the thing. They're going to put him in the slot. He's probably going to be the fourth wide receiver on the field. They're going to spread the field with 4 and 5 wide when he's on the field. He's going to be probably getting mismatches against either an unfortunate linebacker or a safety, and he's going to get some big play opportunities as a result of that. So I think he'll take a step forward, and a lot of it will be because of scheme, and maybe that level of confidence and that production will also help them look at him as, okay, can we make him a slot player? Maybe and if he can improve a little bit more with the releases, that might work. I'm going to see more production from him. Another guy's on that team who I really liked. He was my top player last year at that position, and that was Hakeem Butler. and Hakeem Butler got hurt. Yep, he got hurt a little bit, and he was gone for the year. But he's a guy that I think, now that with Larry Fitzgerald likely to be gone next year or within the next year or two, I'd imagine he might get a shot to play that kind of flanker / big slot role. And with what he can do with DeAndre Hopkins on one side, that could be nice. Or maybe he plays that flanker role a little bit, and they put, Christian Kirk in the slot where he's really best. He might be best, in terms of what he does. And I just think Butler's a guy I wouldn't necessarily write off yet. I was super impressed with his ability to get off the line, his ability to I thought he ran better routes than people characterized. I thought he caught the ball better than people characterized. We'll see how he does. But I think overall he's a guy that people writing off way too soon.
Kind of like Michael Pittman. Wasn't Hakeem Butler one of those guys that took a while to kind of get his stride in college as well to really hit the heights that we saw him come into the league on? So maybe it takes a couple of years in the NFL as well against new competition to kind of recalibrate that process and get to the same place.
Yeah, probably. I mean, you think about it and it's like Hakeem Butler was a basketball player who was learning football. And so I think that was the type of thing with him, is that there was a lot that he had to learn and process, and wide receiver's a tougher position and it doesn't always work out right away. And again, what would have happened if he stayed healthy and maybe mid-year he starts to show up and starts to play a little bit better? It wasn't like everyone was thinking Darius Slayton was going to start when he began the year in New York, and he wasn't starting when he began the year in New York. He had a terrific stretch run, in terms of when he got on the field. So we have to understand it. DJ Chark, you watch him at LSU and it's like fast, can go up and win the ball. But when you watch how he used his hands, how he ran routes, he looked like he had a little bit of a ways to go before he could have a shot to really become something. And the jump between year one and year two was one of the best levels of improvement I've seen from a receiver in recent years. And see, a lot of that comes down to things that you just can't always account for when you're studying players, is how hard and smart they work. And the best thing that I can recommend to people to watch is go to YouTube, go look up the NFL's all-time team and check out the segment on tight ends and listen to Tony Gonzalez talk about how he went from being a top prospect to being an all-time player. And they're interviewing him. They're asking him about like his hands. Like, man, Chris Collinsworth's like, I never saw anybody catch with his hands so far away from his body, and they're slapping at your arms and you're able to make these plays. And it was so great. And, after talking with you, I realized that this wasn't a natural thing for you. And he was like, no. He said, my second year in the league, I led the league in dropped passes. And I was depressed. And I was like, I wanted to get better, and I didn't know. I fell into a hole. And he's like, I started reading everything I could, motivation books, all sorts of things like that. And then I developed a practice plan. I got some help from my brother. I got some help from other people, some coaches. I sought out folks. And every day after practice, before and after practice, I literally caught 100 balls, helmet on, chin strap on, full pads, did these things in a very regimented way. And I got better because I practiced, because everybody thinks when you get into the game, when you get into the pros, that the coaches are going to, coach you up. But every NFL player I've ever talked to, they're like, we get coached for scheme, we get coached for game plan, and they show us some technique, but that technique is usually stuff that we run through to get warmed up. And if you really want to get better at all that stuff, you need to spend real practice time. You got to shed that stuff on your own, or else if you're just going to think you're going to get better doing that for 15 minutes every day or 3 times a week, it's not going to happen. By the time you get good at it, you're out of the league. So you really need to work your tail off on these things. And if a guy like Tony Gonzalez, who everyone saw as a top prospect, had said, I wouldn't have been where I was if I didn't do this kind of work. It's why a lot of guys don't get it. Sammy Watkins said last year, he didn't learn how to run routes until last offseason. Like, he really didn't work on that until then. and didn't understand that. And of course, he also said in a recent profile that he was out drinking like pretty much all the time, during that period, during those early years. And you saw what his promise was. I mean, that 1 year in Buffalo he had was unbelievable. And then you see spurts of what he could be. And this is a guy who's like out drinking, not taking care of his body, always getting hurt because he wasn't doing the extra stuff, the maniacal, detailed stuff that make people great. And then now he's 5, 6, 7 years in the league and just learning how to run routes. And when he did, who did he whip the tail of in the opening game for a huge day? Jalen Ramsey, one of the best, cornerbacks in the league. Of course, he gets hurt again, but different injury.
Always kind of that, but
yeah, exactly. But he got, it was a different injury. It wasn't the foot, which was good that they did. They talked about remaking his body, and look, he took a pay cut and renegotiated with the Kansas City Chiefs because he did perform great in the playoffs. He had a really good postseason this year. So I think he's getting it. The lights coming on for him before his career got too far down the road for him to like lose those physical gifts that he had. And that's what it takes for these players. And sometimes like a guy like Hakeem Butler or a N'Keal Harry or an Andy Isabella, it goes on what's going on in here and whether they're mature enough of recognizing what they need to work on and knowing how to work at their craft to do it. I mean, Demaryius Thomas, last little bit, Demaryius Thomas, was a guy that was like great athlete, didn't know how to run routes for his first few years in the league, if not more. Then Peyton Manning comes into town. And the first, Cecil tells me this. Cecil Lammy, who I do shows with at Football Guys, covers the Broncos. First day of practice, runs a dig route. Peyton Manning throws the ball and he dropped and Thomas drops it. And Peyton Manning's like in his ear, literally like, you can't drop this. This is where I placed it. This is why I placed it here. This is how you need to run this route. This is where you should expect the ball. And then like was literally teaching his receiving core in detail all those different things that they need to have. I mean, like I knew a guy by the name of Chad Spann who played with Peyton his first year as a rookie when actually he didn't play with him. He went to camp with Peyton. Peyton had the neck issue. Peyton didn't play that whole year, but during the summer, he was still working out with the team. And he said, I learned more just from Peyton and Manning handing the ball off to me in practice. Like Peyton was like so detailed. He was teaching us stuff that like coaches don't teach us, So like when you have there's certain players like that who get it. And there are certain players who like respond to that type of coaching. And there are others who are like, I'm here. I made it. I got paid. I'm going to party when this is all over, and people at work like that. So it's the same deal. It's just happens to be at the NFL level.
Well, and I think from last time we told you we were both Broncos fans. We've dealt with the exact opposite of what Demaryius Thomas did with Paxton Lynch, who had the raw physical talent, but he just didn't want to work.
He was a great video game player.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and he lived in Colorado where something's legal. But yeah, so and going back to Hakeem Butler, I think that kind of drives home the point I've been trying to make all offseason is those year 2 wide receivers can take monster. Actually, that's the biggest leap they take in the NFL is from year 1 to year 2. And Hakeem Butler is a physical freak, and he put up huge numbers his senior season. And we have to also take into context where Hakeem Butler was going to school at Iowa State, who barely reached 3,000 yards the last season he was there. He had Alan Lazard ahead of him before that. Or no, yes, it was Alan Lazard before that. And a lot of people look into the breakout age, and it is definitely predictive, but those are things you have to take into account. And I think Hakeem Butler is the most unique wide receiver on that team, if I'm not mistaken. He's like the biggest athlete on that team. Hopkins was not really much of an athlete, very good route runner. Hakeem Butler is a big target that nobody else can really match him in terms of his physical capabilities. And you have to think that they drafted him for a reason. They don't really have much in terms of a tight end, so he could very easily be the red zone target this season for Kyler Murray. Obviously with DeAndre Hopkins there, it's going to be tougher. But you're right. People give up on these guys too early. DJ Chark was a great example of that, where the guy took huge leaps this year, and now he's a top 16 dynasty wide receiver right now.
Oh yeah.
Even with and not to throw any shade at Gardner Minshew, but let's be real, it's a 6th round rookie throwing him the ball. He still put up good numbers for a second year wide receiver. And you saw him. I know you weren't a huge fan of Cortland Sutton, but you saw him take huge strides last year.
Absolutely.
N'Keal Harry's. So these guys that have those physical gifts like that, who, like you said, when they step into the NFL into real exertion where you have to exert your mind and your body, things change. And that's why with wide receivers especially, do not give up on their rookie seasons, because usually rookie wide receivers don't produce like you want them to. The second, third seasons when they do it.
Especially if they have good profiles. I mean, we talked about DJ Chark's size and speed. Kenny Golladay took a year to kind of get into stride as well. He came in as a complete athletic freak. Cortland Sutton, we just talked about, was an athletic freak out of SMU when he came in, even though he was out-targeted and outgained by Trey Quinn. I will say that until my dying day. But, yeah.
Hold on. Can I throw another one in here? Paris Campbell. I like Paris Campbell this season. I've been singing his praises. He's the slot receiver there, right? I mean, they did get Pittman, or was it Edwards? It was Pittman.
They got Michael Pittman, yes.
T.Y. Hilton, I think he's probably getting underrated right now really badly. But, I mean, if like Paris Campbell is the primary slot for Phillip Rivers, and I'm not saying this is how this offense will run, but we saw how successful Keenan Allen was running 40+% of his snaps from the slot.
It's a good point. And why wouldn't it run like that? Because you have Phillip Rivers and you have Frank Reich, who was the quarterback coach for Phillip Rivers with the Chargers. So a lot of offensive similarities. They probably have some very similar jargon and language. And you can totally see how Michael Pittman's going to play that Vincent Jackson, Mike Williams, Kasim Osgood type of archetype of receiver. You can see how that T.Y. Hilton is going to be the much higher end version of Travis Benjamin. And then you look at Paris Campbell and you go, why wouldn't you want him to be kind of more that Keenan Allen guy that you can move around a little bit and do different things with? And they were super excited about him before he got hurt. In training camp, they thought he was much further along than they expected, which is typically true of Ohio State wide receivers who have a very limited role in that offense, that Urban Meyer offense. So yeah, I think it's a great player to mention.
Yeah, I think Nyheim Hines in that offense specifically, because of the presence of Phillip Rivers, is also going to see an uptick in targets just because of what he was able to do with Austin Eckler and Danny Woodhead and all the other running backs that Phillip Rivers has made famous lately. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. With guys coming to the league with crazy tools, with speed like Paris Campbell, with the size and speed of the guys that I was talking about previously, I mean, it pays to wait for the mind to catch up, because the body might be there in college, but your mind isn't necessarily where other veterans are in the league after just that first year, because you're seeing everything for the first time. The guy that you're coming up against, the DB that you're coming up against, likely has seen that particular move or that set of moves or that type of receiver in your archetype many times before, and has already kind of got a feel for what to do in that situation. So just kind of give guys time to get to their full potential when it comes to kind of bringing everything together. But let's now talk about another rookie receiver in this class coming out from a smaller school, but walking into a void when it comes to targets available. Now, I know that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those targets are going to go to a given receiver, but that doesn't discount the fact that if that offense is going to be any type of successful this year, they're going to have to find a way to get the ball down the field in chunks. The team I'm talking about is the Washington Redskins. The player that I'm talking about is AGG, Antonio Gandy Golden. Of course, he has to deal with Terry McLaurin as well, being the number one, being the alpha in that offense most likely. After him, Potentially, Steven Sims could maybe be within a shout of being a value piece of that offense. I think they got Thad Moss as well, if I'm not wrong about that. So I expect Thad Moss to be involved in that offense as well, just because of the amount of passes that he was able to pull down in an LSU jersey. But, I mean, outside of those three, really, I mean, unless you're really, really digging, there isn't another person to command a huge swath of targets. This is going to be a division that's a high-scoring division. We've already seen what Dallas has done with just the sheer amount of talent that they've put around Dak, and what the other teams in that division have done trying to pump up their offenses this year. So we assume that the Washington Redskins might find themselves in a few shootouts. If that's the case, can a guy like AGG have an impact in year one, or is he another one of these guys that come in with the physical tools that might need a year or two for the brain to catch up?
Yeah, I don't think we know yet, but here's the fun little clues that are going to be things to keep an eye out for. And hopefully we'll have some level of a preseason to be able to look out for these things. And one of it is, when I watched Antonio Gandy-Golden, one of the things that I really liked about him is that even though he had a limited number of moves off the line of scrimmage against tight man coverage, what he performed well. So that tells you that his physical ability, is a very strong player. It's hard for him to get knocked off his line. When he executed what he knew, he was able to get a lot more separation, even though he's not workout fast. He doesn't have the workout speed that you would be looking for in, say, at the combine and things like that. But on tape, it looks like he was more than quick enough in workouts. I thought he was quick enough. Thought he showed, that strength and ability to get position and win the ball in the air is all very good. Now, you have to understand that Kelvin Harmon is also a pretty good player and physical who can do those things as well and has another year of experience. And there was some talk about the team being somewhat excited about him as well. And if he makes that next level of improvement, he and Candy Golden are very similar in the respect that they're big physical guys who can go up and win above the rim and win off of technique and strength, as opposed to, top end speed and quickness and great footwork. Now, here's the other thing, though. So if you see him winning consistently against tight coverage in practice and then maybe in preseason, there might be something there. There might also be something there if you start to see him do things that he hasn't done before, using different types of moves off the line, being able to run. And they're talking about how quickly he's learning and developing at a fast rate. Well, one of the things that they've talked about a lot as kind of a pre-draft feature type of material on him is how fast he is at learning different things, whether it's the Rubik's Cube or gymnastics or, how smart of a guy he is, that if that starts to show up on the field, you might have somebody who's special in the regard that they can process information quickly and learn it fast enough that he advances quickly. If not, then what you're going to be relying on then is the next year, because, working at Liberty doesn't probably have the strength and conditioning program that an LSU or an Ohio State or Texas or Georgia has. And as a result of that, guys at smaller schools, even though he looks like he's very athletic and he looks like he's well built and well conditioned, they might not have gotten the level of training that could maximize those skills. Oftentimes scouts say, hey, if he went to Ohio State rather than Liberty, I bet you he'd run a 4.5 40 as opposed to what he ran, because the type of conditioning that's set up there would be more akin to being able to have those kind of results. So give him another year. Maybe he's someone that's actually will develop the athletic ability that you're looking for as a route runner to get separation on a consistent basis. So if it's not this year, I would definitely still be optimistic with him as a year or two guy, but those are the things that I would be watching for. And I agree with you, Etan, that he's probably a player that is going to get an opportunity because they need someone of his size and dimensions. It's just going to depend on how well he competes with Kelvin Harmon, because that's the guy that he's working with, in terms of probably for the same role.
Is there any concern, though, with Dwayne Haskins? I mean, I know things were just really difficult last year there, switching coaches mid-year, not really starting out. I mean, having to play behind Keenum, not really getting a good start to his very young career. I mean, is there concern with not only Dwayne Haskins developing, but him also developing those wide receivers.
Oh, absolutely there is. I think that's a very good point, and it's understandable. I mean, I just wrote something about players that I think that could get Tannehilled, players that could basically, overtake Marcus Mariota, and overtake the starter, and basically how does that affect the surrounding offensive talent? And when you look at Haskins, he's in a dead heat competition basically with Kyle Allen, even though he's going to start off as the number one, in that competition. And you still have the remote possibility that Alex Smith, who's actually practicing now and wearing that Teddy Bridgewater sleeve, might actually be able to play again. And if that happens, we might just see them dump everybody at the side of the road and say, let's go with Alex Smith. That's who we originally wanted anyhow, and give him a couple more years. But the point being is that, the only guy you're going to really draft at any level of like high investment value in that offense on the wide receiver or tight end side is Terry McLaurin. So your biggest question is really, the bigger question for that is, how much is Terry McLaurin affected if he has Haskins, or the Haskins gives way to Kyle Allen? And the answer is probably very little, because he's a good route runner, and he already, if Haskins struggled and he performed well with Haskins, then you should feel pretty confident they have a rapport and they've gotten better. So what that means is for AGG is, where are you going to draft AGG? The second to last pick in your draft, the third to last pick, somewhere in the final 5 picks, most likely. Even if he has a good camp and he's really talked about, he's still probably not going anywhere inside the 12th round of most drafts. So you can take the risk with him and not have too much of a concern, because your draft plan, you're looking at anybody after round 12, you're going, I know that they maybe end up on my waiver wire within the first month, and I'm going to be picking somebody else up. So at that point, I wouldn't worry too much about it. And in dynasty leagues, it's kind of more of a, like, you're drafting them again, that if you're drafting guys expecting them to be good in the first year in dynasty, a lot of people obviously play that way. We always joke that, people play dynasty like redraft, but if you play that way, then you should draft that way. And therefore, he's not a guy that should be on your list. Or you're drafting him low, and you're understanding that you're probably going to churn him, or he's going to wind up on a practice squad or something like that, and you're not going to have that high expectation for him. But I think that what Etan brings up is a good point, is that here's the avenues of where he could be good and why that could happen. It's just a matter of what are we going to need to look for to see if it does.
And then also going back to Haskins, I mean, we just talked about context at the top of this podcast and how everything affects everything else. There was nothing that went right in Washington. Stop. No. You mentioned that the coaches were changed. So obviously the offensive philosophy was changed for Dwayne Haskins kind of midstream. The offensive line was one of the worst in football when it came to protecting the quarterback. They just lost their best offensive lineman, even though he wasn't suiting up for the team anyway. The running game was kind of a shambles because they had so many injuries at the position. Chris Thompson, who was supposed to be a very important part of that offense, was injured once again. Literally everything that you could possibly imagine that could have gone wrong in that scenario went wrong in that scenario. So this is about evaluating, again, the player in the storm of everything happening around him when it comes to looking at what he can do in the future. But Matt, you brought up a very, very important point when it comes to dynasty leagues. Everything aside from value ultimately is irrelevant. Value is the most important thing, because that decides whether or not person A or person B is worth the risk that you're taking. So when you're looking like a guy like AGG, yes, again, if you're only going to spend, your 404 on that pick, then yeah, go ahead. I mean, chances are you're going to get return on that investment regardless of how that pans out for you. That's why that pick is so valuable for you, because it could go either way, and that's completely fine with the level of investment that you're spending on that pick. But when it comes to the other side of things, one of the most important things for dynasty leagues that I try to do, and why oftentimes I find myself shipping off first-round picks for young veterans over and over again, is you don't want to miss at the top. If you're 101 to 106, 107 in this draft, you want to make sure that you get somebody that is going to provide value for your team quickly. you want to avoid those landmines. So, Matt, my question for you and for you as well, Stompy, after Matt answers, is who is your landmine in this draft class? Who's the one guy that you're looking at that you're thinking, okay, well, I know the general consensus is this, but that doesn't necessarily match my expectation?
It's a good question. And, there's a number of players that I would probably put in that realm. One that comes to mind right away is Brandon Ayuk with the 49ers. I think that a lot of people are super excited about Brandon Ayuk. And I look at him and I think, they're showing you things like my colleague Dan Hatman, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for at the Scouting Academy, former NFL scout for the Giants and Eagles, and he's a terrific teacher of the game. He did how Brandon Ayuk fits in the 49ers offense, and I watched the video. It's a great video. It's worth watching, and it brings up some great points about how Emmanuel Sanders was used and what Brandon Ayuk does well in the ways that the 49ers used Emmanuel Sanders. But the things and I've seen also other videos where they've shown that, but the thing that I didn't see from either video was, what about when he's pressed and played tight man-to-man? And what about some of the tight intermediate coverage areas or some of the intermediate routes that he runs, that Emmanuel Sanders runs, that require great timing and great route work, especially against tight man? That's what made Emmanuel Sanders special. That's what makes him. That's why basically I think the New Orleans Saints are probably one of the odds-on favorites to win the NFC Championship this year, because of the fact that they've got a second receiver who's is one of the most advanced in the league at running routes. Who's the veteran on the 49ers receiving core? I don't see one.
Your guy Dante.
Yeah, my guy Dante, who didn't want to work in his second year.
Yeah,
apparently, he didn't want to work, and literally Kyle Shanahan said he could be one of the most talented wide receivers in the league if he just worked at it. Yeah. But he wants to do puzzles, 3D puzzles. So, so there we go. Maybe, and that's fine if that's what he wants to do, but he's going to wind up having a job doing something else other than playing football if he doesn't get it together. And he's probably already burned his bridge with the 49ers to become the starter, unless he comes out like he's playing like Odell Beckham Jr., in his prime. He's got to come out playing like that this year to save any ounce of opportunity in San Francisco. But when you look at it, they don't have a veteran. They don't have the best veteran they had was Sanders, and he was the one that made a difference for that offense last year, because the best route runner and the best receiver they have is George Kittle, So when you look at it from a wide receiver perspective, all these guys are young. Again, we talk about who's going to help mentor them in the training room. Is Wes Welker the coach? Probably, but he's going to spend a lot of time talking about scheme, talking about game plan, and he'll be able to show them things, but are they going to work at it? Are they going to have a peer? Because a lot of these guys go, I remember you. Yeah, Wes Welker, you were good, 10 years ago. They're not going to revere him in the way that they're going to revere a current player who's like killing it in the game, or someone that they can look at and go, look what he did last year. So a lot of these guys have things to learn. And I look at Brandon Ayuk and I think has to learn to get off press, really good at double moves, really good against off coverage. He's going to get plays like that. But I didn't see Deebo Samuel doing a good job getting off press last year. And he had a good year, but he didn't have a great year. And his year really didn't start to take off even more until Emmanuel Sanders on there to command the attention that he did, because now the top man had to face Emmanuel Sanders on a regular basis. So I look at Ayuk and I think he's a little bit of a landmine to me. Another guy that I think is probably, in that category, Jalen Reagor. I like Jalen Reagor, but I don't love Jalen Reagor here. The fact that people are saying Jalen Reagor is like, there's an NFL GM who said that Jalen Reagor his comp is Steve Smith, and that he's like Steve Smith. I mean, again, that's kind of sacrilege to me.
The New York Steve Smith, is that right? The New York one, not Carolina, Baltimore. Right?
Let me tell you something. The New York Steve Smith was a heck of a route runner and a heck of a player who made Matt Leinart look like an unbelievable prospect. And Matt Leinart probably could have been better, than he was. But yes. Anyway, no. Unfortunately, they were talking about the Steve Smith, and while I get that from a size, quickness, ability to make plays in traffic as a runner, there's a lot to love that has some comps. That's like, I'm sorry. That's like comparing the Pop Warner kid who's like trucking somebody, with his stiff arm to Marshawn Lynch. It's just not, let's not go there. So Reagor to me is going to have some beneficial play, but again, you still have Deshaun Jackson, who people go, well, he's old. Well, yeah, but he's also one of the few receivers in the league that I did a study this year for the RSP, basically showed that one of the most successful wide receivers in this era in terms of repeat performances among, to get into the fantasy, top 24 receivers was him. He's like one of the few guys that have done it multiple times throughout his career. He's still going. Alshon Jeffrey, I know he can't stay healthy either, but like when he was healthy, like last year, not last year, but the year before, had a pretty darn good season.
Yeah, that was 1,000 yards.
Yeah. So I think that we have to and then this is a 2 tight end offense as well. You think they're really going to take Zach Ertz off the field? You think Dallas Goedert has played poorly enough that they're going to take him away when they can run 2 tight ends a lot? So where does that leave Reagor? I'm kind of not sure where Rager's going to be an automatically good guy right away. So that for me is a little much. And I think that, DeAndre Swift, I love what DeAndre Swift can do.
You're going to break my heart, Matt Waldman. You're going to break it right here.
Matt Patricia already did. It's not his fault.
Yeah. Listen, I like DeAndre Swift. I love his work ethic. I think he's going to be a very good player in the NFL. I also think that because of the fact that they drafted him, the Lions drafted him, it's a situation where it's either they want this to be a committee, a 3-headed committee, and they want to do what the Patriots do, which is heartbreaking for most fantasy people, or they're looking at it as sending a message to Kerryon Johnson. It's like, dude, you can't stay healthy. What are you doing to maintain your physical condition? We don't trust you to do this. We're going to get rid of you when your contract's up, and we'll have Swift right there. Because when I look at Swift and Johnson, I got to say, right off the bat, I think Kerryon Johnson's the more talented back. I really do. I thought that class with Kerryon Johnson, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley was one of the most talented I've ever seen. And I think that most people, they'll see Swift because of his ranking and say, oh, he's got to be better. And he got drafted as early as he did. But Kerryon Johnson, to me, there's not much of a difference between them. But from my eye and from what I look at, if I were picking in a vacuum and I knew both were going to be healthy, I'd pick Kerryon Johnson over DeAndre Swift. I think he's got better contact balance, better overall power, better overall quickness in his game in terms of accelerating to his top speed earlier. Whereas where DeAndre Swift, he has good short area quickness, but he doesn't bend as well and bend in and out of cuts as well as Kerryon Johnson. But DeAndre Swift's more of a pressure cut type of guy who has unbelievable moves, but he doesn't really have the range of movement that Kerryon Johnson does. They're both good receivers. Johnson's a better route runner, whereas Swift's better at adjusting after his first route doesn't break open, which is often his fault. But he catches the ball well. But I think Swift will work through his flaws and become a very good back. Whereas I think with Johnson, unfortunately, he's got to prove he can stay healthy. And I think the Lions are 2 years and you've missed a ton of games. We can't count on you. So I think what's going to happen is this year, he's going to be a little bit of a landmine if you're looking at him as if you're looking at him as an instant impact player. If you're looking at him as that safe guy that you want to have an impact, I think he's going to be stuck in a committee unless Johnson gets hurt, and that there's a possibility of that. So he's a little bit of a landmine. The biggest landmine for me, and I think the Green Bay Packers have pretty much made it clear, and that's Jordan Love. Jordan Love, they're going to, 2 to 3 years before he starts, and you drafted him in the first round. You drafted Jordan Love in the first round. Listen, I get that he's got a great arm. I get the fact that he's a terrific athlete. I get the fact that he didn't play with great surrounding talent after a better statistical year the year before. but I also know that he makes the same mistakes over and over and over again in situations that that quarterbacks don't do, like NFL quarterbacks don't do. And the fact that he's getting comped to guys like Patrick Mahomes is like, you're missing the point of what made Patrick Mahomes good, which is the type of stuff I described earlier in the show. Jordan Love's the type of guy that what he does is like ramming his head up against a brick wall every game, because it's like he doesn't learn. In consecutive plays, he'll make mistakes. Like, he'll get away with a mistake and then do the exact same thing on the next play. He's done it multiple times on film where I look at it and I go, there's so much that needs to happen here. So I think he's in a situation where if they thought they were using him as leverage to get Aaron Rodgers to get his head on straight, Aaron Rodgers has to be like laughing and angry, at this idea. But I'd be angry because they didn't get him a receiver in the first round. This is a receiver class that's fantastic, and you didn't get him Justin Jefferson. You didn't get him Jerry Jeudy, or even a Denzel Mims, or Laviska Shenault, or even Brian Edwards, or Michael Pittman, or any of those guys. I could mention 5 more guys that they could have gotten for him and give him that second receiver. Dak Prescott's a top 5 quarterback. He has 2 good receivers. You look at Jameis Winston, who had like the most up and down season you can imagine when it comes to statistics. And who does he have? Michael Evans and Chris Godwin, 2 great receivers. Matt Ryan has 2 good receivers. We talk about, well, if you're an elite quarterback, you make your team go. Every elite quarterback to get elite statistics needs at least 2 really good players who are going to catch the football for you, if not 3, to support that. And you're going to give Aaron Rodgers with 1 guy. The rest are guys that they thought maybe have developed, but they didn't do it year 2. They either took a step back or they didn't get there. And you could have picked another guy for him, and you didn't. You picked Josiah DeGuara, who I absolutely like as an H-back, but you're going to use him like Kyle Juszczyk. So, yeah, that may be great for certain things, but picking Jordan Love to me is a landmine. I don't care if you picked him in the 4th or 5th round. Go pick somebody else. Go get somebody else. Get Darnell Mooney, who might have a shot to replace Taylor Gabriel. Heck, go get Benjamin, Jalen Hurts. Yeah, go take Jake Fromm, who might, at least by the end of the year, you'll know whether his arm strength is good enough for him to play in the Wins in Buffalo, because there's a better chance that Jake Fromm, who with a decent arm might overtake Josh Allen, than what we got with Jordan Love. So
I don't know if that was a
better chance. Josh Allen isn't what you think, Stompy.
I don't know if I was just going to say I don't know if that was a compliment on Jake Fromm or a criticism of Josh Allen and Jordan Love. So either way, so there's 2 guys that I think are going too early. I think especially for this year, Henry Ruggs is a landmine. You have Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota, who can't really extend, or I don't know if they can't. I think Derek Carr can, he just doesn't. And John Gruden is more of a lateral. He's not much of a field stretch type of coach either. And if we look at Carr's ADOT, and I'm sure Eton has this somewhere, but it's near the bottom of the league. And I don't think you're getting anything better with Marcus Mariota. So at least in year 1, I think Henry Ruggs is a quote unquote landmine, and he could turn into a N'Keal Harry type where people are like, forget about him because he didn't do anything. I'm not saying that Ruggs won't do anything. I think he will be a disappointment, much like, Shark was in year 1. And then the other one was Keyshawn Vaughn. And this is hard for me to say because you seem to like Keyshawn Vaughn a decent amount, specifically because he can stay on the field and block, which Ronald Jones is not the best pass blocker out there. But I don't think a lot of people understand that side of it, and they're picking him for his more pass catching, which he's not. I mean, he had one decent season as a pass catcher. I don't know enough about him as a pass catcher himself, and I'm sure Matt can tell us a little bit about that to give that a decent analysis. But I'm just looking at his statistics in college. He just wasn't used that much in the passing game, and I understand he's a great pass blocker, but I'm afraid he doesn't bring that much more than Ronald Jones, and yet people are I think banking on Keyshawn Vaughn being the pass catching talent with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay.
With Keyshawn Vaughn, actually, one of the things that isn't often brought up is it's not only Ronald Jones he's competing against. If you want him to be the pass catcher in that role, there is a pass catcher in that role that was halfway decent last year in Dario Gumbuale. So it's more than one person that he's even trying to compete with in that backfield. And I think this goes directly to what Matt said before. Price is everything. Keyshawn Vaughn's price has kind of gotten him to the point that you're starting to have these conversations. If you could comfortably pick Keyshawn Vaughn in the top of the third or mid-second, then I think it's another conversation that we're having at this moment.
I think those are good points. And I think that, starting with, Vaughn, absolutely. I mean, this is, I think people saying he's automatically going to be I think the gong works well when you say Keyshawn Vaughn. I think you guys need to keep that in your
Keyshawn
show.
Vaughn.
There you go.
Keeping it in there.
Womp. Yeah. So, but Vaughn is certainly a guy who, you're absolutely right. It could be a landmine because of the fact that he's going to end up in a committee more than anything else. Maybe even at best. And Ronald Jones did make strides last year. And so if he makes some more, it could be a situation where Vaughn is just a seldom used player. So I agree with that. And with Ruggs, listen, neither, Derek Carr is great when it comes to play action passes and structured plays. Outside structure, it falls apart for him. Marcus Mariota, as athletic as he is, on structure, pretty good. Off structure, the smoke comes out of his brain. You can see the smoke coming out of his ears. Neither of those guys are really good off structure, and I wonder, with this team, whether or not Ruggs is going to fit in with all that. And there's a lot of receivers there, and really, me, it's about rapport. Deep balls are about rapport, more than anything. And if John Gruden's getting trigger happy with, it's time to replace my quarterback, or possibly do that, or have a carousel, or do all the kinds of things that he's done in the past, and they insert Mariota in there at the wrong time, this disrupts a lot. So I'm, John, I was a John Gruden defender about his offense, because I'm, to me, it's the whole, you got to have a certain type of offense, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Look at the Baltimore Ravens, look at the Patriots, look at the Falcons, look at the 49ers, look at all the teams that everybody says, you can't run the ball a lot in the NFL. And then every team that seems to get to the Super Bowl, there's at least one team that gets to the Super Bowl every year that is a high performing run unit, like that. Just their thing is running the football. 49ers were that way, so it's just funny. So when I don't worry about that, but I do worry about his penchant to be like, to pick talent and then just grind them down to the point that they've lost all confidence, and then he puts pressure on them in ways that it's just like, I don't know whether he has a great eye for I don't think he has a good eye for quarterback talent, to be honest. And as a result of that, he then also ends up putting pressure on them. It's almost like he's living some sort of psychological complex out in his coaching, where like all this other stuff is great, but when it comes to quarterback camp, I just laugh because I love his interviews in the quarterback camp, and he was great at that. But having him as a coach, it's kind of like, it's like that. I don't know. It's like that family member who would make a great babysitter for your kid, but don't have them over there for 8 weeks over the summer vacation, because that's when things are going to show up that you're going to be like, oh my God, no, bring the kid home. Yes.
Not to mention that they have a lot of pass catching options there. I mean, not only did they grab Ruggs, they have Brian Edwards, they have Hunter Renfro, they have
Waller.
They did sign not Ertz, but
Witten.
Yeah. They have Waller. They signed Aguilar. Like, it's just like it's like, hey, let's go see what kind of stuff sticks to the wall. We know Waller's going to be I mean, he's great. He's a mismatch all over the place. But other than that, I mean, they don't even use, I feel, Josh Jacobs properly because he was one of the best pass catchers coming out last year. They don't use him in the pass game. They re-signed Jalen Richard, right?
Yeah.
I
don't know what to make of that offense. Like Josh Jacobs, I think is somebody you want to own in fantasy, but it's like he has a ceiling because he had 27 targets last year, even though he's a fantastic pass catcher. So yeah, I don't love the pairing of Ruggs with the quarterbacks, but I don't love that there's 15 pass catchers right now that have all been viable in the NFL.
No, great.
Yeah, I think the thing with the Raiders offense, I think that there's two offenses that are telegraphing what they're going to do. And one of them is the Rams. You can already tell just based on the Rams makeup, even with the Van Jefferson pick, that team is a team that is likely to run two tight end sets for most of the game. I think that the Oakland Raiders are kind of in the situation where they have the personnel to run a lot of things, but I think what we're going to see is a lot of 22, a couple RBs on the field if they're going to use Bowden and Jacobs together, or whoever it is that decides to be that second RB, and then they're going to use their tight ends as much as possible just to get Waller in as many favorable matchups as absolutely possible. So I think they're really telegraphing for themselves to be on a team or have a team that has a lot of wide receivers, but only, two of these guys really see the field consistently enough to give you any confidence about at least owning them in any type of fantasy league early on while they still have the quarterback issue that they have. Now, if this goes into next year and we're looking at a different quarterback entirely, and we're looking at maybe a Trevor Lawrence, we're looking at maybe a Justin Fields, we're looking at maybe a Trey Lance, maybe then at that point, this is something that we can start to look at, because at that point, at least there's a bigger pie to be split between all the different options that they have. But as it stands right now, it does seem to be them trying to protect their offense more than them trying to unleash their offense.
What happens if Lynn Bowden starts a game at quarterback? Just super hypothetical. I obviously it's not going to happen.
I want it to happen. I want it to happen so bad.
You brought up the unconventional offenses. Specifically, I want to talk about Baltimore because I know you're a Lamar Jackson guy. You got me to be a Lamar Jackson guy. I have I have jerseys to show you, Matt Waldman. But they get J.K. Dobbins, who I believe is your number one running back. First and foremost, as a fan of Lamar Jackson and J.K. Dobbins, how excited are you for maybe not this year, and I would think that they would want to use him this year, but especially next year with pairing J.K. Dobbins and Lamar Jackson?
I'm excited this year, even though Mark Ingram probably will start the year as the lead back. I don't see how Dobbins doesn't get onto the field and doesn't flash what it is that he is, which is basically a slightly lighter Mark Ingram with breakaway speed. I mean, so you have a guy who has great footwork in traffic, ability to, beat angles that you would just not expect him to be able to beat at the second and third level. And he's he's a guy who should be able to develop into a sound pass protector. So you look at this team and you have Lamar Jackson, who occupies anywhere between 2 to 4 defenders at any given, exchange point where he's possibly going to take off and run, and he gets anywhere between 2 to 4 guys, sometimes 5 or 6, to overreact to where he's going. And what does that do? That leaves open creases, gigantic craters for the running back. And Mark Ingram was a top running back prospect. He was a fantastic running back coming out of Alabama. Yeah, Heisman player. I think he was my number one back that year when he came out. He just had injuries early on, and he had to split time and all of that. But he's had a nice career when you look back on it. We were all worried about it probably when we first started watching him. The first 3 to 4 years, you're like, oh, I don't know where this is going to go. But it's turned out to be pretty darn good. I think Mark Ingram understands his place. I would be shocked if he's like, I want to leave when I have an out in my contract at the end of this year. I think they'll restructure his contract. He'll take a pay cut. He'll probably be the number 2 back and maybe playing a bit of a committee with Dobbins where he can keep Dobbins fresh, but take a back seat to him. And I think it starts to happen probably sometime mid-year, because the people didn't really love Dobbins, I think, because again, statistics, they looked at the numbers and maybe it wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. He didn't go to the combine, so they didn't get to see those numbers in terms of like he didn't participate in the combine for all of that. So as a result of that, they didn't look at him whipping the tar out of like the defensive backs in the open field repeatedly at Clemson, or like beating angles on film that you can look at and say, obviously this guy has speed. They just looked at I hear people characterize him like he's some plodding tank sometimes. Like I've seen some of that, and maybe they're the extreme views that just kind of caught my eye, but I don't normally just follow anybody on Twitter. I mean, like I usually am looking at folks who I respect their work, and I'll see things that come across the timeline where people are talking as if like he's, Frank Gore right now, and it's like, no, this guy, and I love Frank Gore, but this is, this guy, Frank Gore, they were just talking about this year that Frank Gore ran like what, a 4.7 or something. And they kind of fudged the numbers in San Francisco in his workout because they wanted him so badly. McLuhan wanted him so badly. I mean, J.K. Dobbins is fast, and he's, and that's really like, kind of like saying, yeah, this awesome meal is this 5-star Michelin meal that I'm serving you has a really nice plate. I mean, like that's basically when I say he's got great speed, that's what I'm saying about his game is the equivalent of that. He may not be the number 1 overall running back for fantasy football for rookies this year, because Jonathan Taylor's maybe a better overall runner. And there's certainly other guys who could come in there and do well, but the system he's in, the talent he has, he should be in that conversation among the top 3 to 4.
And he caught balls in every season. I mean, he was a good pass catcher in every season at Ohio State. And by the way, just the 30-year-old Mark Ingram last year, I know that we say he's old at 30, but okay, that's enough. He's old for NFL. Okay, just leave me alone. But 202 touches or 202 attempts and only 29 targets, and still he was the RB11. So just imagine a younger, faster version of that, and you get J.K. Dobbins. So, I mean, he very easily. If the Ravens progress and allow Lamar Jackson to throw a little bit more, get more creative with the play calling and the passing, J.K. Dobbins could very easily be the RB1 as soon as his sophomore season.
Yeah.
I mean, and they run the ball, they ran the ball 600 times last year.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. How can you not? Go ahead.
The Ravens are already one of the most voluminous and one of the most efficient running games in the NFL. We saw this last year. We expect Marquise Brown to be back healthy this year. That's going to allow them to take deep shots and continue to open up running lanes for everybody else on that team. Mark Andrews is going to continue to be the beast that he was. And anybody that's concerned about maybe a tandem backfield not giving J.K. Dobbins enough of a runway to shine must have not been watching, because Gus Edwards had 700 yards for the past couple of seasons that people just magically don't think about when they think about the split between Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins. So even if this is a 1A, 1B situation, there's 1,000 yards just sitting there to be had in a worst case scenario for a guy like J.K. If everything kind of goes wrong for him, Ingram plays the full 16 as the starter, and this is still what we're looking at. So there's so much room to grow from that I think his range of expectations for the rookie running backs compared to guys like Jonathan Taylor, to guys like CEH, to guys like DeAndre Swift drafted in the same draft class, I mean, his range of expectations is as volatile and as exciting as any of them, because he could be that RB1 with a Mark Ingram injury. He could also be a solid RB2 with Mark Ingram still being an RB1 going into the next season. We've already seen that on the Saints, and Baltimore has a better rushing game than the Saints has ever had. So this is a prime situation for a running back to be paired with a talent like Lamar Jackson that's going to allow him to be dominant even in less than ideal circumstances if they come to surface.
No, I love it, and I totally agree with that, and I'm so glad you brought up the Saints, because that's you look at Mark Ingram there, and everybody was characterizing Mark Ingram, the RB2, as the smart play that you would draft and redraft leagues, well after people would be drafting Alvin Kamara high, because you could get Mark Ingram at a bargain and be able to get quality starter play from him. So it's just one of those things about perception that sometimes happens, and that's the fun part about this game, is that you have these varying perceptions and views and narratives that come around, and you have to kind of pick your way around it. And if you can make a good argument, sometimes you're wrong about it, but if it's a good argument that you feel like is rooted in logic, you gotta, those are things you got to recognize and take your chances with.
All right, so I do think we are going to go ahead and save our diagnostic for our next episode here. But really quickly, before we play this out entirely, I just wanted to ask you, Matt, is there one guy that, like, on any team, rookie, veteran, doesn't matter at this point, that you think isn't seen in the light that he should be looked at going into the 2020 season? A guy whose reputation has maybe been tarnished a bit, but you see the diamond that could be moving into the 2020 season.
That's a great question, and I hadn't really thought about it, a great deal. But I'll give you a rookie, and then I'll give you another player on top of that who I think might have a chance at rebounding. The rookie is Quintez Cephas, who I've talked about a fair bit, but I like what he can do and what may occur for him in Detroit down the line. He may end up overtaking Marvin Jones when Marvin Jones leaves Detroit when his contract is up. But he's a very physical player who tracks the ball well, and he's faster than people realize. So, that's a guy, and one who I would say is kind of a long shot, but really started off his career, like at the end of his rookie year, he looked fantastic. And then the beginning of his sophomore year, he had a game against New England where he looked like an all-pro wide receiver. And then the confidence left him. And the bottom dropped out, and he ended up losing his starting job. And then all last year, he started to his wide receiver coach, Keenan McCardle, former all-pro receiver, said, this guy's getting his confidence back. We've kind of rebuilt where he is, and he had a great camp, and he's doing better. And by the end of the year, he started to look a little bit more like himself. And that's Keelan Cole, the wide receiver with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Keelan Cole being a slot receiver, D.D. Westbrook's contract will probably be up fairly soon. They re-signed Keelan Cole to an extension, and it was worth a second-round pick. So it was a second-round tender that they gave to a wide receiver who, no one's really talking about. That when you give that kind of value to a player, you must see something pretty good with what he could do. And when he was money against the Steelers and the Patriots in the playoffs the year that they went to the AFC title game. And then he started off against the Patriots, and he was making catches in tight coverage as an outside player. Yeah, Stompy showing it. So that's that kind of thing that he lost his confidence, and they talked about that. He can play both inside and outside. And I think that with DJ Chark playing the way he does, Laviska Shenault, he's a third player that might be an interesting option for them. It's a long shot, but it's a guy that you can pick up your waiver wire probably now through September, probably even into the first week or so of September before people go, oh, that guy's doing pretty well. Let's pick him up, so that's a guy you should monitor.
So you're saying he's going to be a post type sleeper? Is that right?
Right. There you go.
And by the way, Laviska Shenault, super underrated. I'm gonna throw one out here, and I want to get your thoughts, Matt, but Curtis Samuel for me, and this is going to be a post-hype sleeper. I know you've had Matt Harmon on the RSP cast several times, very good at analyzing wide receivers. Curtis Samuel was kind of his guy last year. Had his moments, had a horrendous quarterback situation. Sure. I don't know how much better it's going to get. I would expect Teddy Bridgewater to be better than the combo of Kyle Allen and I don't remember the other guy. Was it Will Grier that started the last 3 games? Yes. I don't want to say anything bad about Will Grier in front of you. But I mean, coming out, it seemed to me like he was more naturally a slot receiver, a guy or an H-back that could play out of the backfield. And I don't think he was ever used like that with Norv Turner. And maybe I'm mistaken, but it seems to me that with Joe Brady and what he did with LSU and what he specifically did with Justin Jefferson, moving him to the slot and how well Justin Jefferson did there in his final season, that if Curtis Samuel does move into the slot, which he seems to be the best candidate for that Curtis Samuel could end up in having a decent season with Joe Brady in the slot.
No, it's very possible. And I think it's a good point to make that he certainly can do that. I mean, like Norv Turner or Scott Turner, they like to use him kind of more on jet sweeps and end arounds and that type of thing. And occasionally they'll move him from the backfield and run wide routes with him and some swing routes. But I think you might see a little bit more of that with Samuel. But at the same token, Samuel and DJ Moore are very similar in that regard. You know, where Samuel's more moves upon moves and can make the first man miss and he's shifty. Devin Moore is the type of guy that bounces off of people and is shifty and he's quick, and might be even more of a candidate for that. And they're both very good inside receivers. So there's where the possible speed bump could be in that situation.
And that's fair. I mean, that was he was always one that was like, well, I mean, DJ Moore, and again, very different offense this coming year, where DJ Moore only played, I believe, like 8% of his snaps from the slot last season.
Right.
But if he's used correctly, you're right. I mean, but maybe it can be I don't know how to compare this, but basically a slot flanker type of thing where
it's a hybrid type of role. That's what Jefferson did. And I think you're probably right that you will probably see that because Robbie Anderson's going to have to play outside. Mm-hmm. And there's another guy we can add to the list of guys that maybe we'll get a chance to see them, you know, perform better than what people's reputation have of them. And that's Teddy Bridgewater. You know, the thing about Bridgewater is if you look at Joe Burrow, you'd say, all right, his scouting report, not an unbelievably strong arm. He can throw for distance, but not with velocity in the deep, intermediate, and deep ranges. He doesn't have that gun to make those high velocity throws. But he throws the ball deep with accuracy on those high arcing passes. Very good at avoiding pressure in the pocket and finding the open man. You know, he can make multiple points of make people miss when there's multiple points of pressure in the pocket. He can run for gains that move the chains. He's not going to break 40-yard gains on a regular basis in the NFL. He's a smart player who sees the field well, especially sideline to sideline. Sounds like Teddy Bridgewater to me when I scouted Teddy Bridgewater. The only difference is that Teddy Bridgewater didn't have as accurate of a deep ball. He always seemed to be a little off the mark with the deep ball. But just when he got hurt and had that, you know, career-threatening, life-threatening injury that he had in Minnesota on that fluke practice rep, he was really starting to come on in the preseason. Like, I was really impressed with some of the things that he was doing. And when you look at those two guys and that what Joe Brady has and Matt Rule, and, you know, Bridgewater's an interesting guy. I think the most underrated story probably from my perspective, and my perspective is a little warped usually, but like the most underrated situation in this season for me is the Panthers quarterback situation. Because I liked Will Grier, and I think that he still like played reasonably well despite the stats not showing that. But then you have PJ Walker, who's like played pretty well in the XFL, and I remember he played with Matt Rule at Temple, and he's an interesting guy who bounced, I believe, from the Colts to the Seahawks to the XFL now to Carolina signed a pretty good contract with them for a guy who hasn't really started an NFL game or even made an NFL team long term. All those guys, that could be an interesting quarterback dynamic. Like, I wonder, I think Bridgewater could be a sleeper, but then at the same time, I still like what Greer has. And in terms of what he can do, it's a match with what Joe Brady likes. And he might have the best deep ball of the three in terms of his vertical game. And then Walker seems to be a guy who can throw it deep and has the most ability to buy time, but also be able to, really throw the football. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of those guys, and I hate to make it sound like I'm just throwing darts, but this is an intriguing quarterback room, and one that's not talked about a lot because people have written off Greer. Most people wrote off Bridgewater, and now you have this guy who's a relative unknown in Walker. But all three of them have compelling aspects to their game that they're a better quarterback depth chart than a lot of depth charts that people would give more credence to, so I'm kind of can't wait to see how all that kind of unfolds.
And then situationally, this is a team that's going to be down often. That defense is probably one of the worst in the league. We already know what that division does in terms of shootouts pretty much on a weekly basis. None of that is going to stop with now the Saints having a wide receiver too, like you mentioned. So just assume everything the Saints do to be even more supercharged. And then everybody else in the defense, Tom Brady now on the Bucs, maybe you wouldn't expect that team as a whole to be a more explosive offensive unit, but they might be a more efficient offensive unit, so on and so forth. There's so much talent in that division that's going to cause the Carolina Panthers offense to, against whatever they might even be planning on doing, be forced to be in a hurry up, in a we're down 7, we're down 14, we need to come back type of situation over and over again. That's just going to lead to a lot of opportunity. And the whole thing with Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore, I think, is very akin to the situation that we see in Dallas with two guys that are going to operate in the slot, but could also operate on the outside. Amari Cooper in Dallas is probably best operating the slot. Now, that's not to say that Amari Cooper isn't also an amazing outside receiver. He can definitely do that, especially in a flanker role if he's not necessarily asked to be the X of that offense. But he can do, or I think CeeDee Lamb can do the same thing that Amari Cooper can do, in that they can both find time in the slot and then find specific plays where they're out or where they're catching screen passes or so on and so forth on the outside, just to kind of keep defensive off balance. I think you can do the same thing with the two receivers in Carolina, where you have Curtis Samuel, probably the primary guy on the boundary, but sometimes can come in the slot, split that role with DJ Moore, and they can kind of share that role to throw defenses off as well. So just because we pigeonhole this guy into saying, okay, well, this is what he does, this is going to be his position on the field, I think it's going to be more of a situation where it's almost positionless when it comes to wide receivers and just figuring out what works for this particular matchup when it comes to those receivers. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity, I think, in Carolina that people are sleeping on. And then we also have to understand that Ron Rivera in Carolina, regardless of whatever the context was, ran one of the fastest offenses in the league. Now, we don't know if that's wrong. We don't know if that's what the Carolina Panthers were doing, what their situation was, and what they kind of had to do. But that's a fact of last year. They were one of the highest situation neutral offenses when it came to the league in terms of how often they were getting plays off. So all of those things just combined to say that there's going to be a lot of volume in that offense, and figuring out where it goes is up to us. But the fact that the pie is going to be big enough for a couple of guys to succeed is pretty clear in that scenario. But I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I definitely was very, very thankful to have you on again, Matt. We got to do this again every single year. I absolutely love these conversations. Sam, before we go ahead and head out here, do you want to tell the people about what we do, what we got on the side?
Yeah. Well, I guess first and foremost, Matt, I'm always going to, I shouldn't say worship, but I'm going to say worship you. I'm trying to fawn over you. Every time we talk, I fawn over you. I really appreciate the work that you do. honestly one of the handful of people that I trust with my fantasy football knowledge. So I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you put in.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Tom.
Of course. And as Eitan mentioned, we have two things going on. Go to patreon.com/Dino Diagnostic. Support the podcast there. You get access to things like a chat, shirts. We'll even jump the line for you when it comes to our diagnostics if you are donating enough. And then the other thing is go to storeenvy.com and search FF Pod shirts. That's Dynasty Outhouse's store. There's shirts for us. There's stickers for us. There's hoodies. There's coffee mugs for Trade Addicts podcast, Super Flex Super Show, and a couple other podcasts. And so not only does it support us, the podcast, but it also 10% of the proceeds go to Fantasy Cares, Scott Fish's charity. So not only, again, are you supporting us, but you're supporting a fantastic cause. So that's storeenvy.com/FF pod shirts.
And then before we round this out, I mean, I could talk about the RSP. I can't get into the detail that this man can. So Matt, if you want to talk about anything that you got going on with that or anything else that you have going on that you might want to have a couple people be tuning into.
Sure. I mean, Mark Schofield and I just did a RSP film room available on YouTube at Matt Waldman's RSP film room on Trevor Lawrence. We did an hour-long show where we picked out clips that we kind of pre-selected and kind of shared with each other of what we liked about his game. Very fun view. I did a show with Dan Hatman Scouting Academy that was about a 2-hour-long show that I also put on my film room channel on Nick Chubb and why he's a special back and why basically we looked at plays where he faced at least 7 in the box and showed what he was able to do in those runs and why he's teaching tape for the NFL in terms of running back play. RSP post draft is out. So, listen, you can get the RSP post draft for $21.95. It's available. When you get that, you get it along with the pre-draft version. So you get pre-draft, post-draft, and a newsletter from June through December that updates rankings 3 times a year. My first set of rankings updates after the draft come out at the end of this month, beginning of June for the first newsletter. I've already pretty much finished the rankings. I'm just, doing some final touches in terms of just some minor things there, and it'll be ready in a couple weeks. And that's pretty much what's going on, in terms of RSP land.
Best bang for your buck in this community. Not kidding. Like, it's $22 and you get like 5,000 pages. Is that right? 5,000.
I don't know about that. But you get a lot.
I think the last time we talked, I had printed the 2019 one out, and I was like, or no, it was 2018, and I was like, this was a mistake.
I see that you're using it as a chair right now. So
yes, I am sitting on it. It's a phone book. It was like 200 and some odd pages printed back and front. Anyway, Point is it's honestly best bang for your buck analysis. And I know I'm swooning, I'm fawning, whatever. Matt Waldman is my idol in this business, so leave me alone. But seriously, go it's mattwaldman.com/RSP or
Matt you can buy the book at mattwaldman.com.
Yep.
And then you can look at all the content and the samples of stuff at mattwaldmanrsp.com.
There you go.
Lord knows you have the time right now, people. You have the time, even if you're going to pretend like you don't.
I'll just say this is that most people who buy it the first time, they're genuinely shocked at what they get and the quality of content that they get. And they're like, and the emails I generally get are, I can't believe I haven't bought this. I should have bought this 4 years ago. Like, I hear that regularly. I can't believe how much I get from this. You have a customer for life. Generally, that's what that's about. And
100% agree. Customer for life, Matt Waldman. So you got to stay alive until you're 150 years old.
Well, I have 100 years left. Then I better start working.
There you go. Then I'll be dead, and then I won't care anymore.
There we go.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. You can follow me, Aton Mozia at Aton Alive on Twitter. You can follow Mr. Sam Lane at FF Stompy. Matt Waldman can be followed at Matt Waldman. All you have to do is look out for the crow, and there you go. But man, this was an awesome show. I am so stoked to get this into your ears, to get the next one going. Always super excited about the Dynasty Diagnostic, and I just wanted to go out and say thank you to making it to the Dynasty Diagnostic Service Center today, hanging out with myself, with Sam, with Matt. Please be sure to keep up with your scheduled maintenance and catch us next time to ensure quality performance. See you on the next visit.